Special thanks to Horizon Therapeutics for sponsoring the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast, working tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics' mission at horizontherapeutics.com.
I felt in those middle years like we were always inadequate in what we were providing both the boys. There just wasn't enough. There wasn't enough. There wasn't enough. And now James is able to say it was enough. And actually, it was good. It was hard, but he's gracious and commending of our parenting. So I think an encouragement perhaps to parents that are earlier on in this journey is just staying in the game means more than you think it does, even though you're not getting all the things right that you would wish to if life was different.
That's our guest this week, Krista Mason, the mother of Benjamin, who is autistic, and the co-founder of Benjamin's Hope, a live, learn, play, worship farmstead community where people of all abilities are transformed by the love of Christ. We'll hear the story of Benjamin's Hope and more on this Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Now here's our host and the founder of the Special Fathers Network, David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast presented by the Special Fathers Network, a dad to dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Thank you to those who supported the 21st Century Dads on a Ride 2023 campaign, which was a 3,000 plus mile bicycle race from Oceanside, California to Annapolis, Maryland. I was one of the 4 racers, and it took us 7 days, 19 hours, and 10 minutes to go from coast to coast. Special thanks to the following donors for contributing $1,000 or more. In alphabetical order, they are Ina Bird, Kim Duchessois, Jim Duran, Chaz Ebert, John Guido, Horizon Therapeutics, Scott Marcotte, Damian Navarro, Dick Reck, Barbara and Glenn Reed, Rotary Club of Chicago, Warren Rustan, Don Stadler, Nick Topicha Dolny, and UBS Financial Services. If you've not already contributed, please do so by visiting 21stcenturydads.org. Your tax-deductible contribution will help keep our programs free to all concerned. I would really appreciate your support.
The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org. So now let's hear this fascinating conversation between Krista Mason and David Hirsch.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with Krista Mason of Holland, Michigan, the mother of 2, as well as executive director and co-founder of Benjamin's Hope, named after her son Benjamin, who has autism and developmental delays. Krista, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you, David. Yeah.
You and your husband, David, have been married for 32 years and are the proud parents of 2 boys, James, 29, and Benjamin, 27, who has autism and developmental delays. Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
Oh, okay. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and was very fortunate to have 2 wonderful parents, a stable, home life, and actually of interest had I think almost no exposure to anyone in my school life or my home life who was affected by disability. So I live now, as you said, in Holland, Michigan. So being a Buckeye here in Holland, Michigan isn't probably a thing to be celebrated, right?
Is that Spartan territory?
Oh, yeah.
Or the Big House territory?
Both. Actually, it depends. Yeah, both. Yeah. But it's not Buckeye territory.
Absolutely. So out of curiosity, did you have siblings when you were growing up?
I did. I have one younger sister. She's about 4 years younger than I am.
Excellent. And out of curiosity, what did your dad do for a living?
So I love that you're asking about my dad. My dad was in the insurance industry and quite an innovator in his space. And unfortunately, he passed away about 32 years ago. So I was only in my late 20s when I lost him. But my dad was, I think, unique probably in that time, in the 70s, late 70s, and that he really challenged me to think. He was less concerned did I agree with his opinions, but he really, really challenged me to think. So, people ask sometimes, where'd you get that kind of entrepreneurial, innovator spirit? And I really credit my dad in a lot of ways because he wanted to see my brain working.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Thanks for sharing. And
Yeah.
how would you characterize your relationship with your dad?
We were very, very close. The loss of my father, to this day was the most profound experience of grief that I've ever had. And it's, now, 32 years later, he hasn't been able to see the way that God's really used. He actually didn't meet my children, so he never got to be a grandpa. And he didn't get to go through the experience of Ben's diagnosis and then ultimately what God did that was beautifully redemptive through Ben's autism.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. He did die at a very early age.
Yeah.
It's obvious just from the way you talk about him that he had an influence on your life and the way you do things.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that he didn't get to see part of the legacy that he's left. But it's there.
Yeah. I feel, though, remarkably, I guess this is a wonderful thing to share with fathers. His influence to this day, I think often about what would my dad think about this? How would my dad move through this? So beautiful to see that decades later, we still influence our children, right?
Absolutely. And thinking about that, is there a takeaway that comes to mind, perhaps the way that you parented, that you can identify that was influenced by your dad?
I would say yes. I think my father presumed competence in me probably before I earned it. I remember having an economics class my freshman year in college, and I was so excited about what I was learning that I wrote him this. This was before we were emailing on a regular basis, right? So I wrote him this big, long letter about what I now understood about supply and demand. And I'm sure for my father, it was 101 information, but I think he was so delighted to see me being excited about learning. And I hope that I've perhaps instilled that in my boys in some way too.
That's fabulous. Thanks for sharing. So I'm thinking about other father influencers, and I'm wondering what, if any, influence your grandfathers had, first on your dad's side and then on your mom's side.
Both my grandfathers died when I was quite young. But I can talk about the influence that my father-in-law had. My husband, Dave, grew up here in Michigan, so he's more popular here than I am. But his father, we lost him actually just about a year and a half ago. He was a powerful influence in my life in that he was a challenger. This early idea, which we'll talk about later, I'm sure, of a farmstead community for adults with autism. One of the very first people that I shared it with was my father-in-law. And long, long before I understood that my son, Ben, would need this level of support. And then some years later, he was the one that really nudged me in a very directive way that I didn't appreciate at the moment, but was really influential, I think, in helping me understand that it's time for me and my husband to take the initiative to get started.
Well, thanks for giving a shout out to Papa Mason.
Yes, and that's what my kids called him, was Papa. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm known to my two young grandchildren as is Papa. So I think what you get labeled from the very beginning is what you're known for the rest of your life.
And isn't that a good thing, usually? Yeah, right.
Well, thanks for sharing. Thank God for Papa Mason.
Yes.
So my recollection was that you took a BA in business and psychology from Miami of Ohio. And I'm sort of wondering, where did your career take you?
It's interesting because when I was in college, I'm certain that I had no idea of going into nonprofit work. It just, no one in my family had been in the nonprofit space. It was just not familiar to me. So out of college, I took a job in pharmaceutical sales. I sold drugs. That's a noble thing, right?
Well, we have a joke in our family because our oldest son works for Coca-Cola, and we jokingly, tongue-in-cheek, call him the Coke dealer.
Well,
which is sort of like selling drugs, like you were talking about.
Yeah. So that's what I did for a number of years. Then when our first child, James, was on his way, we had just bought our first house, and we bought it based on both of our earnings, not thinking forward particularly. And, James was on his way, and I spent most of my time traveling. And it occurred to us that this really isn't going to help our family thrive. So we made the decision at that point that I wanted to stay home with the kids for a number of years, and we couldn't afford our house without my income. So we sold that house and bought a little fixer-upper. So, and I had the privilege of for about 10 years being home full-time with the kids.
Well, thanks for sharing. So if I can recap, you were responsible, right? You had a bigger house or maybe a bigger mortgage than you might have been able to afford
Yes.
on one salary.
Yep.
And you downsized.
Yep.
And you sort of lived within your means so that you could be more family centric.
Yep.
That's what I heard you say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you were a stay-at-home mom for about 10 years.
Yeah.
And out of curiosity, how did the two of you meet?
Yeah, we both went to Miami of Ohio for undergrad, and met our senior year. I admired Dave from afar, and then started dating right before graduation. And Dave was heading off that next fall to law school, and we ended up getting married between his second and third year of law school.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were college sweethearts. Is that accurate?
Well, the last 3 days of college, but you can call us that.
Okay.
We get, if you happen to know Miami of Ohio, if two Miami grads marry, you get Miami merger Valentine's Day cards every year, and we get one. So I think we count.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing. I love it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about special needs on a personal level and then beyond. I think you said earlier that before Benjamin's diagnosis, that you or David didn't have any connection to the special needs community. Is that accurate?
That's correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what is his diagnosis and how did it come about?
So Ben was typically developing for about 16 to 17 months of his life. He was gaining language. He had probably about a dozen words, and he was impy and mischievous and interactive. And between the ages of 16 months and I'd say 19 months, he went through what in hindsight was a very, very rapid regression. Of course, when you're in it, you don't always perceive it, in that way. But during that time, he had chronic ear infections, lost his language. I remember a day that he was in his little high chair and I, had put that big tray on in front of him and I was doing this little dance and song thing. I wouldn't do it for you. It was, I'm sure, embarrassing, but it was just a routine that we had that always made him just squeal with laughter. And I'm doing my little dance and singing, and it was as though he was looking through me, beyond me. He just, no reaction. He just folded inward. And there was no way to connect with him. So, we were in the process, as most families, we went to our pediatrician, you get referred to the specialists. And by the time it was actually his second birthday, and it was 1999, and we were to see the doctor at Ohio State University who, had led this series of evaluations. And I remember, on that day thinking, we're going to learn a bit of information that's going to define what life is going to be. And so, we went to this appointment. We were sitting in front of this doctor's big, huge wooden desk, and he walks in and, not long on bedside manner, he sits down very directly and looks at Dave and I. Ben's playing with his little Thomas the Tank Engine trains down at my feet. And he looks at me and says, "Your son has autism, and time is not your friend."
Wow.
I know. And I remember feeling that in the speaking of that word, he erased everything that I thought I knew about Ben and being Ben's mother and what might his future look like. And he just had this huge eraser, and he just erased it and replaced it with a word that frightened me.
Did you know what autism was at the time?
I did. Interestingly and providentially, I believe, probably a year earlier, we had neighbors move in a couple doors down from us, and they had a 6th grade son with autism. So I knew Julian. Julian would be in and out of our home, and, we were becoming close friends with the family. So I knew one person with autism.
And if you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism.
You know one person with autism, right? Exactly, right. So, I think that was a jarring meeting for us. And what I do appreciate as I reflect back on that, he wanted to help us move quickly to understanding the importance of early intervention. And, so he said, time is not your friend. And we said, what would you do if this was your son? And he said, well, I'd move to New Jersey.
Oh my gosh.
I know. Well, this late 90s, right? At that time, autism was not a household word.
Right.
And the research centers of the country tended to be on the coasts, and educational services, in those areas were much more advanced than they were in the Midwest. So Dave and I went home that night and we made a list of all the the pros and cons of trying to move to New Jersey. And we had no connections. We knew no one in New Jersey. Dave wasn't licensed to practice law in New Jersey. That's a big deal. And we had, my mom had lost, my dad a few years earlier. Everything was in Columbus, right? So there was this big, long list of staying in Columbus and then nothing on the New Jersey side. So, we really saturated ourselves in the research. And within 3 months, we had a 40-hour-a-week applied behavior analysis program running in our home in Columbus.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, what I heard you say was you took the Ben Franklin approach, which is to make 2 columns, list the benefits or pros of each. Mm-hmm. And then, sometimes it helps you to visualize.
It does, yes.
You get it off your mind and put it on paper so that you can see, how does this sort of weigh out? What are the pros and cons, if you will? And there wasn't any reason to think otherwise that you were not moving to New Jersey.
There was nothing in the New Jersey column at the time other than that doctor's comment, right?
Right. So that was the beginning of your journey.
It was, yeah.
And was there any meaningful advice that you got early on that you can look back and say, yeah, if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't be where we are, or something that's pivotal that comes to mind?
Yeah, in fact, when that doctor very bluntly said you don't have, time to sit around feeling sorry for yourself because you got a diagnosis for your son, time is not your friend, jarring as that was, as we were leaving, he looked at me and looked in my eyes and he said, "This is still your Ben." I think as frightened as I was about now what was unknown about the future, I think he had great wisdom in reminding me that this is your boy that you love and and you are the right parents for him. So, I think there was that balance of hard truth that was necessary as an impetus, right? But then also the restorative word of our children are known and loved by us. And even when we don't have all the answers and we don't know what the next steps are, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, well, I can only imagine what it must have felt like to be the parents that you just described, getting this diagnosis and, taking the medicine, if you will, as bitter as that might have tasted.
Yeah.
But also sort of getting a pat on the head and saying, this is your situation, right? It's going to be okay.
You can do this. Yep.
Wow. So when you look back, were there some important decisions that you've made along the way, raising a child with autism and developmental delays?
Yes. I think decisions and then just God's goodness to go ahead of us and things. As I said, we started a very intensive early intervention program in our home. Ben was making really wonderful progress in the first year and a half, I would say. So he started to regain a little bit of language. We were encouraged. And then Ben, probably just shy of turning 4, Dave came home from work one day and he had a bottle of wine in his hand. It was the day of his annual review. And you know how you're always a little bit nervous about what's that going to be. And so he walks in with a bottle of wine, which wasn't customary. That was, kind of nice. Puts it down. He said, let's get the boys down. So I put the boys down. He said, "You better sit." And he probably poured me a glass of wine. He said, "They want me to take a position in New Jersey."
Oh my God. What are the, you can't make that up.
You can't make it up. You can't make it up. So by, within a couple months, we moved and resettled in New Jersey. Yeah. So, I think, our story is one of doing the things you can do, pour into the research, make the decisions, be bold with that around things that seem to have promise and hope and good practice for your loved one, but be on your knees because God is already ahead of you in this. And neither one of us had no idea that there would be a request to take a position in New Jersey. What a remarkable provision that was. So we moved.
That's amazing. Yeah. How long were you actually in New Jersey then?
So I think just shy of 8 years. Then we moved to New Jersey. Now Ben's 4.5. And one day it's the only time it's happened in my life, I had a picture in my mind's eye as clear as a photograph of a farmstead community where adults with autism would live and thrive and have belonging. It would be a faith-centered community. I mean, I saw it so clearly. And I shared that idea with my father-in-law. And he said, well, that sounds like a good idea, Krista. And I said, well, it does, but we won't need that because Ben's having this big intensive early intervention and he's going to come out of autism. But that would be a good thing for somebody to do.
How prophetic, yeah.
Right. I know. And then, 5-6 years pass. By that time, Ben is my size, which isn't saying much. I'm 5'1", but his progress had greatly plateaued. And he was struggling with rage and aggression. As a not traditionally verbal person, he didn't have language. He was struggling. We were struggling. Oh, it was just a time of trying to keep our heads above water. And my father-in-law said to me, Krista, where are you with the idea for the farm?
Wow.
Right? He didn't forget it. I think I had far pushed it to the back. I was so angry with him at the moment because it was a truth in love, statement. He was holding the mirror in front of me to say, Ben is, short of God doing a miracle, Ben is not coming out of autism. And it's time for you to get started.
Wow. Well, we're going to go there in a minute, but I just want to focus on what you'd said. This is a sort of a dark chapter, if I can call it that.
It was.
With the rage and aggression that you were referring to.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, not to focus on the negative, but what were some of the biggest challenges that you and David faced in that time or over that period of time?
So many. I think for families who have a loved one with profound autism, some people use the term severe autism. I have mixed feelings about that. You're just trying to get through a day. And, we had, our son James, who was 2 years older, and, the disparity of attention that we had for James because, Ben, and he didn't choose this, but he demanded everything and more than what we had. And so I think, you're in the midst of that, recognizing that your other son, your other child is getting scraps.
It sounds very challenging, right? That issue of family balance.
Yeah.
Right? Because your resources are being stretched and, you have this vision of that, I should be parenting each of my children in a similar way with a similar commitment, similar amount of time and resources. And, that gets blown out of the water.
Yeah.
So what is it that you did to compensate, when you had that awareness?
Dave and I think one of the things we've done very well in our marriage is a little bit of a divide and conquer strategy. Mm-hmm. It's served us well. We're still married. That's a good thing. Also, I think, it is a thing that how do you maintain, connectedness and cohesiveness as a couple when life is necessitating that you're always dividing and conquering. But I think we're both quite pragmatic and able to really kind of navigate that in a way that kept us going. It's been interesting to me over the years, even as my oldest son, who's, just about to turn 30, is a therapist. That's what he does for a living. And he works with adolescents that have, all kinds of different challenges in life and their families. And it's been quite interesting to hear him process his looking back on his childhood and our parenting during his childhood. He understandably, I think, felt the disparity of attention during many, many years of childhood. But now he can look back and really, I think, feel thankful that we were able to stay together. It was messy a lot of the time, most of the time, all the time. So I think here's the reflection I'm getting to, being, at the stage of parent where both my boys are now firmly in their adult years. I felt in those middle years like we were always inadequate in what we were providing both the boys. There just wasn't enough. There wasn't enough. There wasn't enough. And now, James is able to say it was enough. And actually, it was good. It was hard, but he's gracious and commending of our parenting. So I think an encouragement perhaps to parents that are earlier on in this journey is just staying in the game means more than you think it does, even though you're not getting all the things right that you would wish to if life was different.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. Thanks for your transparency, your authenticity. Mm-hmm. And what comes to mind is that, there's these expectations that we each have of what you were describing, the parents you anticipated being versus the parents that, you became.
Yeah.
Just based on the circumstances.
Yeah.
It is revealing, though, to learn later in life, like you were just sharing from James's perspective, that it was good. It was okay.
It was odd and different than all of his friends, but it was good.
It seems, if I can read between the lines, that Ben's had an impact on his older brother, your marriage, and maybe the extended family. And one of the positive consequences is that perhaps it led to James's career path.
It did.
As a therapist, as somebody who can empathize with other people who find themselves in circumstances that they wouldn't ask to be in.
That's right.
But, they're there. And, how do you go from the circumstance you find yourself in to where you are more desirable to be, right? And so he's eminently qualified, right? Because of his lived experience, right?
He is. Yeah, and he can speak with parents who are 20 years his senior with a level of insight that you wouldn't typically have at his stage of life, right?
Absolutely.
And I think one of the great takeaways of life and the progression of life in our story is I wanted God to lift autism. And I know that's a controversial statement. People, some would take great issue with that. But what I observed autism to be for Ben was excruciating. And how can you not want your child to not have pain, right? There's no gentle edges to Ben's autism. And God didn't say yes to that prayer. And he had such a larger story in mind that is redemptive and impacts so many people, but it included Ben's autism. That's a central part of how God's used his life in a redemptive way.
Yeah, well, you raise a good point, which is if your child is undergoing some pain, as a parent, you feel it's your obligation to alleviate the pain, right? Remove the pain.
You want to, right?
That seems like the right thing.
Right.
When you, I guess, accept the fact it is what it is. There's this person first language that we've all been sort of instilled to use, which is the person has autism. And you would understand that it would, at least by some people's way of communicating, you don't refer to autistic Ben, it would be Ben with autism. And what I've learned more recently from adults in the autism community, and apparently the research suggests that 80% of the adults with autism would prefer to be referred to as an autistic person.
That's right. I mean, there's the identity first language is moving toward the prevailing way of talking about this. And it's interesting. I did a interview recently and I used person first and I used identity first. And after the interview, one of my coworkers said to me, did you did you do that on purpose? And I said, I did, actually, because I recognize that for a person who has autism themselves, identity first language is honoring. And I want to honor that. And there are other, occurrences where, person first language is considered more honoring. So here's where I am. I'll just use them both and hope that everybody understands that I just want to speak in an honoring way, right?
Yeah, well, I think your point is a good one, which is you just need to identify what somebody's preference is.
That's right. What's your preference?
And then respect that, right?
Right.
And, don't be judgmental, right? If somebody says...
It's not mine to decide, right?
That's right. But I think that what my enhanced understanding is as well is that autism is just part of who individuals are. It's not something that should be erased or removed or something that somebody should be ashamed of. And some people think it's a strength.
Right.
Because what is a weakness in some cases is a strength in other situations. Or people in my profession, I'm an investment advisor, talk about assets and liabilities.
Yeah.
These are beneficial over here and these are not so beneficial over there. It's just the yin and yang of it all.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you for sharing and being so open about it. So I'm sort of curious to know, in addition to the impact that Ben's situation has had on his brother James and on your marriage, like you had made reference, what, if any, impact has he had on your extended family?
All holidays happen at our house, so everyone drives to us. I'm sure that's a trivial one, but it is interesting, creating environments where Ben can be successful kind of drives all activities and the things that happen, in and around our family.
We'll be back with more of the conversation on the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast in just a few moments. But first, this quick message. Please help 21st century dads gather research on families raising children with special needs by having them complete the Special Fathers Network Early Intervention Parents Survey. A link to the survey can be found in the show notes. As a token of our appreciation, each person, mom or dad, who completes the survey will receive a Great Dad coin. Thank you. Now, back to the conversation.
And I think, what I want for my family or people in my life or our community is I want people to see Ben as a wonderful human being first. And yes, autism is a big part of who he is, but I think it's kind of breaking down that natural discomfort that we feel whenever we're encountered with anything that's unfamiliar to us, right? And helping folks feel comfortable. So like Ben has cousins his own age who love and delight in him. And I think they are more accepting humans because of being in life with Ben.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. It sounds like he's had a positive impact on a lot of people's lives.
Yeah.
And as you were describing everything being sort of Mason family centric, the holidays and celebrations, had you ever considered phrasing this not Benjamin's hope, but Ben's world?
It is Ben's world. We didn't consider that. Well, it's funny because in the earliest days of the formation, it was actually called Benjamin's House. Down the road, we did a DBA because somebody used in a strategic meeting, used the phrase that this is Benjamin's hope. And we went, oh, that's what it is. So that's kind of how the name emerged. In this day and age, many years later now, I don't know if we would have settled on a name that also had Ben's personal name in it. But nonetheless, it is what it is.
Well, let's use that as a way to segue into talking about Benjamin's Hope, which is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, started in 2007. And I'm wondering, what is Ben's Hope Way?
I'm glad that you asked about that, David. I think the most distinctive thing about Benjamin's Hope is our culture and how that kind of permeates how we do life together here. We got into this habit of using the phrase the Ben's Hope Way years ago on my team. We have about a staff of about 110 right now. And we would talk about the Ben's Hope Way as like, that's our distinctive of, what we value and how we want to interact with people. And one day my board president said, define it. So we did. We workshopped it all together as an admin team and really fine-tuned the words that we consider to be our DNA. So the Ben's Hope Way, committed to loving God and others, we fiercely respect the dignity, intelligence, and value of all humans. We are creative, courageous, and committed to excellence. Through the love of Christ, we live the abundant life together.
I love it. Thank you for sharing. We'll put that in the show notes. So
Oh, good.
anybody who might be listening, jogging, driving, don't have to stop and pull over and try to write it down.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And the value of doing the hard work of putting words to this is this now becomes how we teach, how we train, when we need to do corrective action. It governs everything because we'll dissect it. For example, we respect the dignity. So when we're a very growth mindset organization. When I am speaking with a resident, a man or woman that lives here, or one of my colleagues is, and we fall into maybe a tone of voice that would be appropriate for a child, that's not dignity-based, right? So we have language for gently reminding one another that dignity-based language means I speak with adults in a tone of voice that is appropriate for adults. There's lots of nuance that can come out of these words that really govern and shape our culture and our way of interacting with one another and providing care.
What I like is by defining who you are and how you do things, there's an accountability.
Yes, there is. And also a way to celebrate people. Oh, can I tell you a story?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. So here's an example, like the presuming intelligence and presuming confidence.
Which came from your dad.
Right. Yep. It did come from my dad, which I don't know that I've fully connected until this interview. So thank you. Yep. Oh, make me cry. So here's the story. So there's a gentleman who lives here at Ben's Hope, and he has this uncanny ability to notice when a light bulb goes out. And we've got, I don't know how many light bulbs, thousands of light bulbs around campus. And I'll call him Joe. He's always the first one to notice that light bulb's out. So he wanted to be part of the team of replacing light bulbs. And it happens that Joe has a very significant tremor. And going up on a big, tall ladder, maybe 20 feet up in the air, in a lofty ceiling would not be something he would choose to do because it wouldn't be safe for him. So my facilities manager, this is years ago now, but he and Joe went together to the hardware store and they bought a big long piece of that PVC, that plastic pipe, right? So they bought this big long piece of PVC pipe that fits a light bulb. And so now when Peter notices the light bulb is out, he puts the light bulb in the little pipe and, the facilities, fellow goes up the ladder and they replace that together.
I love it. Yeah.
And is that an efficient way to replace a light bulb? Of course it's not. But that's not the value. The value isn't efficiency. The value is the dignity of this man, right? And the idea of co-laboring for the kingdom. So we use, the Ben's Hope Way as how do we think creatively? That's an example of thinking creatively to respect the dignity and gifting of this man. So that's a real nuanced art form that we don't always get it right, but we talk about it constantly. And I think what that translates into for the men and women who live here or participate in our programs or come to the Church of Ben's Hope, it translates into a absolutely beautiful level of regard for humanity.
I love it. Thanks for sharing that story. And obviously getting an extension pole that was designed for replacing light bulbs 20 or 30 feet off the ground would probably be the most efficient thing. But I love what I hear you saying, which is like a win-win solution, right?
Yeah.
And it's all about inclusion and acceptance.
It is, and being creative to make it happen, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So as I understand your mission, the Benjamin's Hope Way mission, it's live, learn, play, worship. And I'm wondering if we can drill down on each of the aspects of this model, which is also referred to as a farm model. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure which came first. You made reference to that and your father-in-law sort of holding up the mirror
Yeah, right.
and saying, what about this, Krista? So was it a farm model first, or did you come up with the live, learn, play, worship
Yeah.
sort of phraseology first? How did this evolve?
So that farmstead idea was part of the initial early vision, which I truly just believe was from God. And farm work on a farm is a beautiful match for some people. What are all the things that make life wonderful for us? Having a place of belonging, purposeful and engaging work, a community where we're accepted and valued, play, recreation, things that delight us. So all of that then led to the idea of live, learn, play, worship.
I love it.
Yep.
So as I understand it, it's a 52-acre campus in Holland, Michigan, and you offer semi-independent housing opportunities for adults with autism and other disabilities. And I'm wondering how many individuals actually live there or participate in the programs.
So I'll walk through each of the pillars if that's good. So live refers to our residential services. So if you were to come onto our campus, and you can see some of this on our website, you turn in, there's a beautiful post and beam farm with alpacas out in a pasture. You wind back and there's a really architecturally interesting community center kind of fashioned after Herman Miller style. We're in Michigan. You wind further back and then it's called Grace Circle, a drive that goes around with woods surrounding it and 6 beautiful farmhouse style homes, big front porches, really lovely, inviting homes. So each of these homes is licensed individually as what we call in Michigan an adult foster care home. And language terminology, varies state to state, of course, but we are licensed in each of those homes to serve up to 6 individuals.
Is there an expectation that you're going to continue to build more homes? Is there a waiting list? Or how do you deal with the fact that the demand is higher than your capacity?
The demand is vastly higher. And if I bring me back to that question, but I want to touch on something else first. When the board looks at what are we called to do as an organization in our community, the residential services, of course, are a piece of it, and it tends to be what people focus on. But when we think about how do we steward what God has blessed us with here for the benefit of the most people that we can in our community, we also have a church plant under the 501c3 of Ben's Hope that probably 400 to 500 people consider this their church home. On a Sunday night, we probably have, 120 to 150 at a time. But many, many people, and interestingly, many people who don't have disability in their life. I know, isn't that neat?
I love it, yeah.
They come, they're invited, and they come and they're like, this is the kind of church I want to be part of. Yeah. So, that's a big part of our outreach. We also have Monday through Friday programming that people from the community attend. They don't live here, but they come for 2, 3, or 5 days a week. We also have a wonderful friendship ministry that happens on Thursday nights. Well, I think last night we had almost 100 people here, and then we also offer a method called rapid prompting method, which, is an instructive method that helps people who are not traditionally verbal learn to communicate through typing. And lots of students from the community that come for that. So, all in all, we probably got about 500 people coming, for one or another program over the course of the week. The residential portion is our most expensive and intensive program, but really just one part of many outreach.
Well, thanks for putting that in perspective, that it's a component.
It is, yeah.
And it's a very important component, obviously, for those 31 or up to 36 individuals. So we've covered the live portion. How would you describe the learn portion?
Yeah. So learn really refers to a couple of the programs I just touched on. One is next. The question that I get all the time from families, especially as their loved one is approaching the end of their schooling career, is what's next? And, optimally, employment is next or higher education is next. when you're having that conversation with a family whose loved one is perhaps not traditionally verbal, very profoundly affected, maybe has a high behavior profile, that end of school is a cliff. Mm-hmm. There's I would say literal terror, that is a common experience of, what's life going to be like now? So our programming that's designed for the community is a whole person growth approach that is really designed to help the post-school age person have an opportunity to continue to grow and develop skills and have some regular rhythms and routine of learning that really help life remain full and wonderful. So that's called Next. That's a relatively new program. We launched it a year ago this month, and designed really to focus on folks in the broader community. And I would say the other real learn component is rapid prompting method. We have invested in this heavily and have 2 certified instructors on our staff that trained under Soma, who is the woman who developed this method. I don't know what else I get more excited about in terms of what we're offering right now, but RPM. We have students who have been, doing this for several years, so it's not like an overnight thing, who have gone from having no effective verbal means of communication. Of course, everything's communication, but they didn't have a way to get their thoughts out, who are now fully independently expressing thoughts that are remarkable through spelling. It's super controversial if you're not familiar and you dig into it. People love it, people hate it. I look at it as it connects with dignity. It gives an opportunity for learning and growth. And I wholeheartedly believe in its efficacy because I have seen it with so many of our students at this point.
So in addition to the living arrangements we talked about and the learning that we just talked about with Next and rapid prompting, a third component is play. Recreation. And I'm wondering what type of resources are there.
That is somewhat organic and somewhat designed, I would say. We have a beautiful walking trail around the campus and, of course, the barns and the gardens. So because we really cultivate a culture of engagement, there's just a lot of opportunity naturally for play and being outdoors and being active. And then we also cultivate it. We partner closely with Hope College, which is only a couple miles from here, a good bit with Grand Valley as well, around Club Connect and the activities that happen on a Thursday night. And then with great intentionality through the Church of Ben's Hope, really work to kind of pair all abilities friendships. And this was an effort that we did through the summer last year. And many of those friendships have really blossomed. They're not meant to be prescribed. Like we don't say, go to a ball game, but we let people, through their natural shared interests, really grow in opportunities to do stuff here at Ben's Hope and out in the broad community.
So I'm thinking about advice now, and I'm wondering specifically what advice you can offer a parent, maybe specifically dads, who find themselves at maybe an earlier part in the journey, raising a child with autism or different disabilities for that matter.
Yeah. I had a conversation with Dave, with my husband, about this. And, his early experience, around Ben's diagnosis and mine was different. We're 2 different humans, of course. But I think he would be comfortable with me saying, and I think a lot of fathers do experience, the loss and the grief of a diagnosis, sometimes in a different way than mothers. Great generalization, right? There's, obviously no one way. I think that the things that you perhaps envision as a dad that your son or your daughter is going to do or you're going to do together, there is grief associated, with that diagnosis. I think my word of encouragement, now 25 years beyond that diagnosis, is it may indeed look nothing like what you thought it would look like as a young parent. And that doesn't mean that it's not going to delight you and be beautiful and extraordinary. I look at Ben's life now as, he's a 27-year-old man, who he is and the impact that he's having. And I can't fathom it any other way And I would imagine if he could express in words, he might say the same thing. And I look at like what I want for James and Ben, my two boys. I want them to have purpose and belonging and friendship and acceptance. And they both have that, but it looks very different one to the other. I guess to boil it down, while the future may indeed not prescriptively look the way that we imagined, be open to the possibility that God will do something beautiful and beyond through your child's disability.
Yeah, well, that is so eloquently and beautifully stated. Thank you. So is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Stay in the game. Yeah. I think to couples, if you happen to be married, grace toward one another and do the best that you can and trust God to let that be enough. For single parents that are doing this on their own, reach out and find people to be with you in this. And to children and adults with a diagnosis of disability, be celebrated. Who you are is beautiful and wonderful and full of hope. And that's a good thing.
Absolutely. Let's give a special shout out to Rick Bull of All Abilities Church in Naperville, Illinois, for helping connect us.
Yeah. Thanks, Rick.
So if somebody wants to learn about Benjamin's Hope or contact you, what's the best way to do that?
Go to our website, benjaminshope.net. You can also follow us on Facebook.
I'll be sure to include those in the show notes so it'll make it as easy as possible for somebody to follow up.
Great.
Krista, thank you for your time and many insights. As a reminder, Krista is just one of the advocates who's part of the Special Fathers Network, a mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stcenturydads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Would you please consider making a tax-deductible contribution? I would really appreciate your support. Krista, thanks again.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening to the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children match up with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support other dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stcenturydads.org.
The Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast was produced by me, Tom Couch. Thanks again to Horizon Therapeutics, who believe that science and compassion must work together to transform lives. That's why they work tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics at horizontherapeutics.com.